Something I enjoy doing with my boxes, by the way, is so if you start with one, like arranging them, right? If you start with one from a pretty default angle, if you're struggling with varying the angles of your boxes, consider the one of the axes. You can draw another line right next to this one. You can just draw another box based off of this, but instead of drawing it flat out like that, try to go for a rotation. So rotations really only count once you place them next to another box. So it's when you give it context that it really starts to have an effect. Otherwise, you could just be drawing random boxes floating around and you can't really tell that they're rotating because they're just there. It's like a story almost. You can see them moving. Chloe, for rotating boxes, I would try to reference one of the edges on your box and try to rotate it in like with the context of a couple surrounding boxes. Because if you just draw boxes, rotated on their own without, placing them in a type of environment, if you can consider the boxes that surrounded the environment, then I think that can be considered like the context of the rotation. So just drawing them like this, you see like it's a bit harder to find a rotation because you always find that same Y shape, and it doesn't really mean much if you rotate it. So I would say, if you pick this box as your context and then draw another one down here, and then you place your other box right beneath it. Here, like you feel a rotation because you're comparing it to another box. So you could do that on one edge like this, or you can even take the edge here and slide it over like that. If you're looking to take this to another level, you can, because right now we're considering only the whatever axis this is, you just have a bunch of guidelines going in this direction. So the only thing we're considering here is keeping all of them converging to one vanishing point over here. But you can also take, let's say, either this edge or this edge and rotate a box on this angle. And so now all you're considering is having all of these guidelines converging to a vanishing point. So if you think of it like this, like you're just considering separate angles or separate edges of your boxes as like a reference point to match your next box. So with this, the rotation has more of a purpose as opposed to just drawing them randomly. That's why people sometimes practice drawing boxes from they try to do it in like a 5-point perspective, which is good because you start to understand how the 5-point grid works, but it's a bit generic in the sense that you don't really go out of your comfort zone too much. Like you just have every box facing, like rotating at an equal angle. So I would say try to be a bit more free when you rotate your boxes, because the only way you apply them in the end is to construct figures or animals or machines, vehicles with the primitive forms, right? And to do that, they're probably not going to be rotated at a random angle separate from each other. They're going to be together and they're going to have context. Arches made of squares, not curved boxes, are good practice. You would only find, let's say, like an arch from here to here when you're really viewing a large amount of boxes in the same space. You're considering them all to be in the same kind of photograph, you could say. They're all being photographed, and your field of view or your lens has a very wide angle. When you're walking out on the street, the earth is flat, but when you zoom out, it's round. Usually we don't see boxes very zoomed out. It's commonly viewed like this, right? But when you're drawing a scene, you might have to zoom out if you want to capture everything. But I wouldn't consider the warp too much, because it's not as important as rotating your boxes with context to one another. You have to consider different concepts when you're drawing cylinders. First, identify the two different types of lines that you're using to draw them. With boxes, you're only using edge lines and I guess silhouette lines to form your box. So you have the silhouette, that matters a lot, and the interior edges. So with cylinders, you do have the silhouette, but the silhouette is composed of call it a curved degree or an elliptical. And then you'll have another elliptical in the back here. On top of that, we have connecting lines. So which one do you think is the most important out of the two?
Not the straight lines, the other ones.
Yeah, the ellipticals. So they're more important because you can tell the angle in which the cylinder is facing. But with two connecting lines, you can't really tell where it's facing. You can only assume that this part is closer to you because it's bigger and that this side is smaller. When you're drawing your cylinders, it's super important to consider the ellipticals. If you're starting your cylinder, just making sure that these connecting lines are converging as it goes back in space, and you draw your ellipticals kind of half-baked, it's not gonna sell the cylinder. You can have really nice ellipticals and like diverging. You can even have diverging connecting lines, which is incorrect, but you can still sell the idea of a cylinder more than this, right? It still feels like it has form and volume.
And if I want to cut the cylinder, what would you like recommend doing?
Consider it like a gradation of the curve degrees. So notice how the degree here is quite flat like this, and as it goes back in space, so the farther curved degree or elliptical is going to be rounder. So you're going to have a transition between flat and round. So you have to try to make those contour lines, they're called contour lines, not silhouette lines, as you go across the cylinder. So once you're able to establish those, you can then wrap it around, and then as long as they're accurate, I think that's how I would cut them, right? So just making sure that transition between the flat and the round ellipticals are accurate. Yeah, you're welcome. That's why cylinders are more difficult, right? Because you're considering a round edge. It's a lot harder to make sure that this round edge starts at the same point horizontally, if that's what you're aiming for. Making sure that it's symmetrically sound, and making sure that the minor axis is of an accurate length. But once you can consider that, then you should have an easier time drawing your cylinders. A good trick for making sure that your cylinders are drawn correctly is considering the direction of the cylinder. So I sometimes see people draw cylinders like this, where you have the connecting lines touch here and right here, right? And then here and here. Notice how these lines are somehow converging. So they should never be converging. It should always be pointing in one direction. So you have these, and they're parallel to each other. And then you have your ellipticals on top of it, like this. So this is the direction of the cylinder. You see it's perfectly horizontal. It matches a right angle with the major axis. Here the major axis is not straight, which is fine, but this line has to be parallel with that one. And when you draw a line from the center of this one to the center of this one, it has to form a right angle, where you can see there's an obtuse angle and another obtuse angle, and a acute angle here. So this is a very technical approach, but if you're trying to figure out why your cylinder is wrong, that could be one of the reasons why. We've got a Go Rav asking, are these degrees good? Let's see. So I'm liking where you're going with these, but for the curve degrees here, I would consider the farther back that they go, the rounder they're gonna get. So if I have a cylinder here, just like this, you can't really tell that there's a change in the curve degree, because both of these curve degrees are pretty much the same distance from our eyes. However, if you shoot the cylinder back in space, these are going to get a lot rounder the farther back they go. And if you keep bringing it forward, at one point it's going to cross our center of vision here, and eventually it'll be flat, like the elliptical will be perfectly flat like this once it crosses our center of vision. Or you could have your center of vision be here, but the cylinder is just rotated at an angle where it shows the front plane. You could also have another cylinder rotated so it's not showing us its front plane. It would just take a lot longer for it to get rounder, but you can see the difference here already. This flat curve degree versus this one, which is rounder. So the thing you have to focus on is making sure that they change and that there's a difference between them. And you can see the farther one, it's not much farther back, but it is a little bit farther back than this one is from our camera or our eyes. So you have to make sure that it keeps getting rounder as it gets smaller in perspective.
When it comes down to the boxes, what is the thought process when you're trying to make, like, again, like how it's like curving and overlapping?
This thing I explained earlier here. you're trying to just find different, like I'm just searching for different and interesting ways I can put them into a composition and have them relate to each other. You're looking for those spatial relationships. Like I did a couple boxes and I was realizing that they weren't having, I wasn't thinking differently. I was just drawing boxes as I always did. So the thing that struck my improvement here, I think, was figuring out a way to put them in a composition. Like here, it feels like they're tied together. They tell more of a story, or they describe a character, maybe the torso and the pelvis, right? Putting them together like this, it just sells more of the space and the relationship between all of the boxes. It gives them context, right, as to how they're rotating. Otherwise, they're not really rotating, they're just there in space. If you want to show rotation, think of an animation, right? Like of a rotating box, it can't have one frame. It has to have many frames. So you can even think of it as a box traveling through space, right? Animate it, but just with one frame.
These frames in the middle of the animations where the box is kind of moving so fast that it becomes kind of round.
I wouldn't consider any motion effects or blurs or warping with your boxes. Just consider them moving slowly but rotating, and just draw those frames kind of as you draw your boxes. The only time they should warp again is if you're really zoomed out. It's all just exploration, right? Just try to have fun and think of different ways to draw your boxes. If you're always drawing it the same way, you're not going to improve as much. But if you try to experiment and go outside of what people usually tell you to do, like if you look at Pinterest tutorials, it's going to be generic and it's not going to level up your way of thinking. Like even me, right? I told you I was drawing them as I usually did, just focusing on having them individually be sound in structure, and making sure that, you know, my guidelines and perspective were very subtly converging to the vanishing points. But I wanted to take it a step further and try to, you know, consider one axis to have them all converge to, and having them rotate like this, right? It's something that I learned from just drawing. Like after 100 boxes, I learned that. That's why the more mileage you give yourself and the more items that you have to draw, the more you're gonna give yourself the time to think and allow yourself to come up with new ways of drawing. So that's why I think the hardcore level is really good for people who have time for it, but you need the schedule that fits it. So
I mean, the warpy ones are a little bit off.
yeah, you want to avoid warping your cylinders too much. You want to keep them like solid structure as much as you can. Yeah, so just to respect the point of the exercise is to, you're really aiming for solidity and description of like the form of a cylinder. You're not trying to distort that. If you think about why are you warping that cylinder, it's probably just spontaneous and for fun, right? Right, it's fine to have fun, but as long as you're trying to have fun by developing your way of thinking, with the idea in mind to focus on the fundamental of the month. So if you go on month 1 and you hit the tab on top, you can find the channel topic. So it tells you what to focus on: cutting, extruding, believable structure, what you're building a foundation for. We're only focusing on form and more organic stuff in the month 4.
Okay, can you speak about line quality and also, like, you know, getting those clean, crisp lines?
Yeah, if we're going really into line quality, you can think of how fast you're drawing your line. I think that's the biggest factor when it comes to line quality. So if you just have a line here, you have to think of the speed. So there's a different feeling between a box when I draw it with fast lines like this. My lines are a lot smoother, and I feel like they just describe a guideline without describing too much form.
Okay.
And it's a lot easier to add value lines like this. But with slower lines, I feel like it's more effective for describing form. So here you have, your lines are faster, they are cleaner, and they describe a really straight and solid line. But it's harder to maintain the accuracy that you have when you're trying to have them very subtly converge. So with slow lines, you can really find that subtlety and convergence. So what I'm doing is I'm thinking of my isometric box, what the box would look like if the lines were parallel. And then I'm taking that guideline and rotating it on an angle off of this axis right here. So that's what gives it that very subtle, it's very precise, but you have to consider that. And so notice the different feeling that we have here with the quick lines. It's lots of pressure, and then the pressure kind of releases over here. With the solid, or slow lines I should say, is you have pressure, kind of fades away, and then lots of pressure at the end. So it's like using a brush or an ink pen. You're going like that. So that's what I do with all of my boxes. I find slower lines work a bit better. Notice how I've made a ton of mistakes in this box. It doesn't matter how many mistakes you make, as long as you draw over those mistakes and correct them. No one cares if your boxes are clean or not, as long as you're making those corrections in your mind. So I feel like slow lines allow you to do that a bit more than quick lines. You can still do it with quick lines, but it looks a bit chicken scratchy, as they say. You don't have to make your boxes clean. Like if you're afraid to post them because they're not clean, like I wouldn't be posting mine, right? I've made 1, 2, 3 mistakes here. One of these lines should be representing the box, but I drew like a bunch of them. They're at different locations, they're at different angles. All that matters is that you're making those corrections in your mind. You're not making a final piece that people are gonna look at. Like you're not working for Valorant. You're just drawing boxes. So as long as you make those corrections, right, you tell yourself that in your head, you'll do fine.
There was a huge problem that I was having with this earlier, this one box, where like half of it was all right, but then like the other half, it just went off course. Like even now, this is like a bit off course, and I consider in my mind, it's like, do I restart that?
No, never restart your boxes. You've done a box, you've learned from the mistakes from that box, you just start another one. It should literally be a timeline of how you're thinking differently. That's how you should think of it. And for any drawing that you do in this challenge, it's a timeline of how you think
And if you
differently.
just